creating this stormy lighthouse animation is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it. Hey hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools and let's get started. Now before we get started, if you want to use the exact same colors as I will be using, make sure to pause the video here to go download the free color palette. It will be linked in the description below. But if you want to pick your own colors, that's totally fine as well. And in this video, we're not going to do a sketch. We're going to start straight up with coloring the different elements, starting with the background. So go ahead and select your background color layer that just comes with any canvas in Procreate and set it to a nice dark blue-gray. So if you're using the color palette, it is going to be this color right here on the top left, which as you can see is really quite dark, but pretty much middle of the way in terms of saturation. And from there, because we don't necessarily want the background to be just flat, we're going to create a bit of a gradient. So you can go ahead and rename the layer 1 layer that just comes with any canvas in Procreate again. You can go ahead and rename that to background gradient. Now on this background gradient, we're going to go with a lighter version of our dark gray blue. So in the color palette, it is this one right here, which as you can see this time is pretty much middle of the way in terms of brightness, but it is really quite desaturated. And in this video, as usual, I'm going to be suggesting a few different brushes that you can use. Some brushes are going to be free brushes that come with Procreate, and really for this video, it's really not about the brushes, so you can totally follow along with the free brushes, no problem there. And I'm also going to suggest brushes that come from my illustration bundle. Now, these brushes are really not essential, but they can help you get more professional results because they're really super sensitive to the Apple Pencil. So if you want to check them out, they will be linked in the description below, and there's always a special promo code for the YouTube people, but again, not essential at all. And especially for this gradient, the goal is just to create a basic shape, so you can really use any brush that you want. If you're working with the free Procreate brushes, I recommend picking in the sketching pack the 6B pencil. And if you are working with my illustration bundle, in the texture pack, picking the outlines brush. So zooming out so you can really see the edges of your canvas, you're just going to draw a curve roughly at the middle part of your canvas, and then you're going to fill it in. Now, since we're working with brushes that do have a bit of texture and grit within them, you might need to adjust the threshold, and to do that, super simple, just keep your pencil on the screen and then move it either towards the left to fill less space or towards the right to fill more space. So the goal here is to find the moment right before the color fills in the entire screen, so I'm just going to lower it a little bit. Come on. There we go. Roughly around there. So this is not exactly a gradient. Now in Procreate you have a few different approaches to create a gradient. If you want something super smooth, what you can do is, with that background gradient layer selected, going in your adjustment panel and picking Gaussian blur, you can then add some blur to create the gradient. So that's one option. I personally want to have a little bit more grit and texture in my gradient because I want this to be a stormy illustration, so I want the sky to look all messy. So still with the background layer selected, we're going to pick the smudge tool, which is this little finger icon right here at the top. And in the painting panel, we're going to select the stucco brush, so it's roughly in the middle of the list. And we're going to set it to pretty big. The exact size really doesn't matter at all, but big enough so that we can just kind of go over our line and just blend it in a little bit. Great. So now that we have that, we're going to start building kind of the land part and then the water. So for the land part, we're going to go with two different depths. We're going to go with some sort of land far away, which is going to be almost the same color as the background, because The goal with that lens is to break up the landscape and give it depth, but I don't want to distract from the lighthouse, so we're really going to make sure they are there, but they're really quite subtle. So go ahead and create a new layer above your background gradient layer, and rename this one to Mountains. So here, if you're working with your own colors, I recommend just kind of color picking a color towards the top of your gradient. Otherwise, if you're working with the color palette, we're going to pick this light blue-gray right here, which, as you can see, again, really quite dark and really quite desaturated. And then with the same brush, all you have to do is map out some very low kind of rock mountain shapes. And then same thing, you just fill it in, adjusting the threshold as needed. Great, so we're going to repeat this with some sort of peninsula on which we're going to put the lighthouse. So just creating a new layer above the mountains and renaming it to Peninsula. Now the peninsula is closer to us, so it's going to be a little bit darker, but it's going to be essentially the same base as this bluish gray. So in the color palette, it is right here at the top of the column. And you can see, again, it's just a darker, slightly more saturated version of the other blue-gray that we used for the faraway mountains. And here, same thing again, you're just going to draw whichever kind of shape of peninsula you want. And then you're going to fill that in. Now on top of that peninsula, we might actually want to add a bit of grass just to make it pop a little bit more. So either you change your blue manually a little bit more towards the teal without going full green because that would look crazy. So just a bit more teal, or in the color palette, you can pick this green right here. I know it's really hard to see, but it's right to the left of the burnt red-orange. And then with the same brush again, we're pretty much just going to use that one brush for the entire video, I can tell you already. You can just go ahead and add a bit of grass where you feel the need to. Awesome! So next we're going to start drawing some waves and some water, and we're going to do that on a few different layers so that we can have some transparency between the different waves, which is going to help us create that cool depth effect in the piece. So go ahead and create a new layer above the peninsula and rename it to Waves 1. And for now we're going to leave the opacity at 100. And we're going to pick a light blue-gray. So in the color palette, I'm going to use this one right here, which, as you can see, really quite bright and still very desaturated. And here you can draw any type of wave you want, any shape you desire. You could have some super big, like tsunami kind of wave. You could have a bit of more of a calm water. I'm going with the really traditional, almost like kid drawing kind of wave. So just kind of little spiral things like this. Making sure that the different waves are not all the same size and the same height, because believe me, that's not a look. And if you want here on this layer, when the waves are aligning or when they're coming towards the peninsula, you can make them kind of flip around like they hit the rock and are kind of, falling back. And here, if you've done a good job at connecting all your gaps, you should also be able to just fill in your entire shape. And feel free here, once you do have a full shape like filled in, to just go back and refine the waves. It is one thing to draw a line, but usually once you kind of fill in the total shape and have your color blocked section, it is going to look quite different. So it is worth taking a little bit of time to reshape your waves as needed. You could use the eraser, the paintbrush, but just making sure you're happy with the shapes in general, especially the ones I would say around the peninsula, because that's where the focus is going to be in the piece. It's that lighthouse element which is going to be there, so the eye is going to be drawn to those waves as well. So here, feel free to take all the time you need, of course, to play with your waves. Feel free to pause the video if you need. Otherwise, we're just going to move on and repeat these steps 2 more times to layer the waves. But before that, we're going to just lower the opacity of this layer, probably around 60%, I would say. Maybe even 50, you can play around, but you want to lower the opacity so that we can start seeing the different elements kind of through them. And then we're going to create a new layer. We're going to rename this new layer to Waves 2. And we're just going to do the same thing, but this time the waves are going to be a little bit lower. Again, feel free to pause the video here if you need more time to play with your second layer of waves. Otherwise, we're going to lower the opacity of those again. This time leaving it a little bit higher, so if you went for 55, let's say you would go at 60, maybe adding 5% to what you did before. And we're just going to repeat these exact same steps one more time for waves 3. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave a comment with the word storm. Long story short, the secret password does two really important things. Thing one is more fun than useful, if I'm honest, but still really important. And it is that you know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you are. And whenever you leave a comment, no matter what the comment is, I get to sometimes see either your face, either your name, or even just a username, and that makes all the difference for me to see who's part of the creative community that we're building here on the channel. So that's reason number one. But reason number two is probably the most important and the most useful, and that is that the secret password does give me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, and that helps me create better tutorials for you, which is super, super important. So yeah, if you watch this far, just leave a comment with the word storm, and then we're going to keep going. Now you could leave the waves like they are right now, or you could just go back and create, foam layers for each wave layer. So for example, you could go back in between wave 1 and wave 2, adding a foam 1 layer. And with a lighter version of your blue-gray in the color palette, it is this one right here. As you can see, again, just lighter than what you use for the rest of the water. Just going over all the different crust of your wave 1 waves. Now for that, it might be helpful to just hide wave 2 and wave 3, so you're sure you're just going over wave 1 waves. I'm saying waves so many times, I'm so sorry. But just kind of adding that foam element at the front can really, really help make your waves pop. And I mean, it just takes a few seconds, it's super easy, so might as well do it, right? So you would end up with something like that, which you can also lower the opacity of the foam, probably way less than the waves, maybe around high 80s. And then just repeating that for wave 2 and wave 3. So reactivating wave 2, creating a new layer above wave 2 but below wave 3, and renaming that to foam 2, oops. And then same thing, just highlighting the different crust of the different waves. Once more, lowering the opacity around the high 80s, and repeating this one last time for foam 3 above wave 3. And there you go. Now before we move on to Lighthouse, we're actually going to add some rocks in the foreground just to help frame the piece a little bit more. So create a new layer above everything you've had so far. Rename it to rocks. And for those rocks, we're actually going to go back to the super dark blue we used for the very first background we did. So in the color palette, it was this one right here. And just like for all the other elements, all you have to do is go in and roughly sketch the shapes you want and then fill them in. Great, so at this point we're finally ready to start working on the lighthouse itself, but we're starting to have a lot of layers, so I recommend just grouping all the wave layers together. So just swiping them towards the right with one finger. So from wave 1 to foam 3 essentially, and then just tapping on group to create a group. You can then collapse the group and rename it to just waves. Then above of that wave group, but below the rocks, honestly it wouldn't matter, but let's do it that way. Go ahead and create a new layer and rename it to Lighthouse. And you can really draw any kind of lighthouse you want. I'm going with the pretty classic, white and red lighthouse. And I say white, but the base is more going to be some sort of a dirty gray, I guess, or dirty beige. So in the color palette, it's right above the burnt red. It's right here. So as you can see, yes, almost fully gray, but with a tiny, tiny little bit of orange. And that is because if we were to go with pure white, it just wouldn't work with the fact that this is super stormy and dark. So from there, again, same brush, we're just going to draw this very traditional lighthouse shape. Maybe adding a bit of a base as well. Either flat or curved, however you want it. And if you want, you can also add the kind of little house shape at the top, or whatever house you want, really. It can be any kind of lighthouse you desire here. The goal essentially is just to map out the silhouette for now. And once you're done with the silhouette, we're going to activate alpha lock so that we can quickly paint on it and add any kind of color elements you want. So in Procreate, to activate alpha lock, there's a quick way to do it. You just swipe your layer with 2 fingers towards the right. Oops. And if that doesn't work for you for some reason, you can also activate it from the layer menu, so just tapping on the layer and then selecting alpha lock from the list. So with alpha lock activated, we can go back in with any color of your choice. I'm gonna go back in with this burnt red, which as you can see is in the same kind of hue as the dirty gray. It is just way more saturated and way darker. And then since we have alpha lock activated, we can just quickly brush over, and these new colors are going to stay within the silhouette we already have. So this is a great way of just adding details to our element without worrying about staying within the lines. So I'm just going to add a bit of red like this, 2 stripes, nothing fancy. And then I'm going to pick a charcoal to draw the top house and maybe a bit of a window and a door. Now the charcoal I created is pretty much the exact same as the base, color palette color that comes with Procreate. So you're gonna have to trust me on that one. It is right below the burnt red, right here. And as you can see, this time it is super, super dark, super desaturated, but it is blue based. Just coloring the top of the house. Adding a little door, and maybe a little window. Now with the same blue gray or dark color, whatever you've been using, we're going to draw the railing, but we're going to draw the railing on a different layer so that we can add a light behind it. So go ahead and create a new layer above the lighthouse and rename it to railing. Now here I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm just going to draw kind of a rectangle. And we're not going to see it super well, so I'm just going to hide the lighthouse to see it. But I'm going to add 2 more vertical posts just to make it look more like a railing and less like a rectangle. So take all the time you need here to draw any other element you want. Feel free to pause the video if you need to add more stuff, and we will all meet in the next section, which is going to be adding the light and the animation and the rain as well. Great. Great, so once you have all your elements mapped out, we're going to start by adding a bit of light in the lighthouse. It's not going to be the one that kind of spins, but it's going to help us see the railing a little bit better. So go ahead and create a new layer between the railing and the lighthouse and rename that one to, let's go with soft light, I guess. I don't know. Now, to really make sure we have a good light effect, to make sure the color we paint look like it's popping and it's bright, we're going to use a blending mode. So to access blending modes in Procreate, just tap on the little N next to the check mark, and we're going to pick the blending mode add right here. Now, if you want to learn more about blending modes, they're super powerful and they're absolutely great tool to have when you're doing digital art, but they can be a little bit complex, at least too much for just this video. But I do have a full tutorial all about blending modes, so I will link that in the description below if you do want to dig a bit deeper and understand how they work. Otherwise, if you don't care, that's totally okay. Just stick to picking add for this. And we're going to pick a nice bright orangey yellow. So in the color palette, I'm using this one right here. As you can see, it's pretty much more of the orange on the orange side than on the yellow side. It's almost fully bright and it's middle of the white in terms of saturation. Now with this orange yellow, we're just going to draw a bit of a light towards the middle of the lighthouse like this. Now this blob of light, we do want it to kind of be diffused a little bit more. So we're actually here going to use the Gaussian blur technique I talked to you about earlier in the video to create a gradient. So with your soft light layer selected, going in the adjustment panel here at the top, picking Gaussian blur, and then adding just enough blur to have a bit of a smoother light, but we don't want it to just disappear like this. So the exact amount is going to depend on stuff like the size of your canvas, but you essentially want something a little bit like this. And we don't want that little light to bleed out under the railing, so we're just going to very quickly erase that. Now we do also want to have a bit of light on the lighthouse and the peninsula. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything and rename it to, oh gosh, let's go with environment light. Same thing here, we're going to use add. This time we're going to lower the opacity a little bit, otherwise it's going to be way too intense. Probably around 50%, but you can tweak as needed, of course. And very gently, you're just going to brush your light over the top of the peninsula. Now I can already tell you mine is too intense, so I'm going to go back and lower that after we're done. But before that, we're just going to add a bit of light on the sides, or the top at least, kind of the top sides, I guess, of the lighthouse. And a little bit on the top of the base, if you do have a base at least. Yeah, so I'm probably going to lower mine around 20%, to be honest. We don't want it to be very strong, but we do want it to be present because after all, we're gonna have lights spinning, and if the environment doesn't have any lights, it's kind of weird. And you can also go back in with your eraser and just kind of clean up your light, just if you feel the need to, otherwise it really is not that big of a deal. And the last little element we have to do before adding the actual animation is drawing some rain. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything once more and rename it to rain. And for the rain, we're going to pick the lightest blue-gray that we use for the foam on top of the wave. So again, in color palette, there was this one right here, but otherwise super bright and desaturated. And here, if you want, you could just draw individual, lines to showcase rain. That could look really good. But I also have a rain brush that you can download for free. It will also be linked in the description below, so feel free to pause the video here and go download that. And once you have it downloaded, it should be in at the very bottom of your brush library in this imported section, this rain brush right here, which you can set pretty big, to be honest, for this. You can experiment. Again, the size is going to depend on your canvas size, but you do want to make sure that the dots are pretty big. And yes, right now it's going to draw a bunch of dots, which I know doesn't look like rain, but believe me, this is step one. Now step two to actually create rain from this brush, or from any kind of splattered brush for that matter, is to go back in your adjustment panel and picking motion blur. And then with motion blur, this is how you're going to create your rain. And by doing it that way, you have a lot of control over kind of the intensity of the rain and how fast it looks like it's falling, because you can just swipe your finger in the direction you want the rain to be falling in. Let's say I want it to be that way. And then either have, pretty short little rain or very intense kind of stormy lines. So I'm gonna go pretty intense, maybe a bit of an angle. But by doing that, you're gonna notice that your rain is going to look quite transparent. So if you feel like it's too transparent, pretty easy fix, just go in your layer panel and then swiping your layer towards the left with one finger, you're going to be able to duplicate it, which is going to help with opacity. And if you want at this stage, you can just merge the two layers just by squishing them with two fingers. And that way you're going to have just really nice, super quick, but opaque rain. So this is pretty good, but we're still missing the most important part, the actual light turning around the lighthouse. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything once more and rename it to Lighthouse. Oh wow, whatever that was. Lighthouse Light. And set that layer to the blending mode Add as well. Then we're just going to go back to the light orange that we used, and also going back to whichever brush you've been using that was not the rain brush. So free brushes, that could mean in the sketching pack, the 6B pencil, or if you've been using my illustration bundle from the texture pack, the outline brush. You can go ahead and just kind of draw the shape of the light beams you want. Now if you wanted, you could have those as these big, super bright triangles. I want mine to be a little bit softer. So if you want that too, go ahead with the eraser and just erase a little bit of the end of both sides. And then from there, we're going to use the same technique we used for the background. So the smudge tool, set to the stucco brush from the painting pack. And then you're just going to smudge in towards the lighthouse and then back out towards the edge of your canvas. And you can do that as much or as little as you want. That is totally a question of personal preference. But that way you're going to be able to create a really nice textured, kind of painterly looking light beam. And feel free to also adjust the opacity if you feel like your light is too intense. I feel like mine is. You can just lower it until you find something that you like. I'm probably gonna go around, let's go with 80. Something like that should work pretty well. So now that we have all the elements mapped out and the light mapped out, we're going to start animating. So first thing first, we're just going to open up Animation Assist, which in Procreate, you can access that by tapping on the wrench icon menu here at the top. In the Canvas submenu, activating the toggle right next to Animation Assist. Now that's going to open up a menu here at the bottom, and if it's the first time you touch Animation Assist, don't worry if all your layers are kind of weird. That's totally normal. The way Procreate works in terms of animation is frame by frame, and it's taking all of the different layers and all the different groups you have and creating frames from those. So you can see here, if I just scroll through the bottom of my list, essentially I have all my different layers and all my different groups as frame. And if we were to click play at this point, we would just shuffle through all the different layers we have, which is definitely not what we want. So we're going to just tell Procreate that the lighthouse, the waves and everything is actually the background, and what we want to animate is the light. So the way to do that is first make sure that Procreate considers the background elements, kind of the painting, as one frame. And so for that, we're just going to group all of the layers we have except for the lighthouse light as one group. So just swiping everything towards the right, except for Lighthouse Light, and then grouping that, and just collapsing the group. So by now you should see that in your animation menu, you only have 2 frames, the background and then the light. But still, if we click play, it's flickering through the background and the light, which is still not what we want. So we need to tell Procreate that this background illustration is, well, the background. So the way to do that, pretty simple, just tapping on this background frame and activating the background toggle right here. Now, if you don't see the background toggle, it is because you have something between the background color layer that comes with any canvas and this group. So if you have a layer, for example, well, it won't let me do it, but if you had a layer between your group and background color, you would not be able to set your group as the background. So make sure there's nothing between your group and your background color. So if you've done everything right, at this stage, if you tap on play, you shouldn't see anything happening. So to start making things move, we're going to create multiple frames of the light, always starting with the one we just created. So we're gonna go ahead and duplicate the one we have already. Again, just swiping the layer towards the left with one finger, and then tapping on duplicate. Now with the top layer selected, you are going to use the arrow tool, setting it to freeform. And you're going to kind of squish your light horizontally, and then you're going to recenter it so it aligns with the one you had before. Now be careful though, doing that you're probably going to create some harsh edges from, well, the sides of your canvas. So if you have some of those, just go back in with your smudge tool and just kind of stretch them out real quick. So now if we click play, we should see it's going to alternate between these 2 layers, and you can already see some sort of a movement happening. So we're just going to repeat this step until we have essentially just one line connecting in the middle. So duplicating the top layer, selecting the new one at the very top, going back in with the arrow tool set to freeform, and then squishing our layer horizontally, putting it back in the center, and with the smudge tool, stretching the light beams as needed if they're cut at the side. So if we click play, we should see even more of a movement. Now you can already see it's starting to look like it's turning a bit. So we're just going to repeat that a few more times, duplicating the top layer, arrow tool, freeform, squish, recenter, maybe a tiny bit of blending or stretching, mostly blending at this stage. And repeat again, duplicate, squish, recenter. I don't really have any more blending anymore because the rays are so short, so I'm just gonna go straight back to duplicating, squishing, center, once more, duplicating, squishing, center, and probably one last time, duplicating, squishing, center. Oh, let's go with one very last time just for fun, duplicating, and then squishing a tiny bit, center. And at your very last squish, this is where you should essentially have the ray of light pointing towards you. So instead of having 2, you want to have 1. So just going in with your smudge tool, you're just going to stretch what you have towards the top and the bottom instead of towards the side. So if we click play now, we should have pretty good animation. Now, depending on the settings you have, it's probably going to do like what mine is doing, which is it's going to go through the list once and then just jump back to the first frame. So just to avoid that and have a continuous motion, just go in your settings and instead of loop, select ping pong. So it's going to go through your layers kind of back and forth. And you can see now it's going to do a much better kind of looping motion. Now you can also adjust frame per seconds here if you want to have a faster light or a slower light. I like mine to be pretty slow. Now, one last little thing, if you want to export your animation and use it as a video on social media, you need to make sure that it is at least 3 seconds long in order to post it, for example, on Instagram and Facebook. So the way to know how long your animation is to count all the frames you have except for the background, so just the light frames. And then seeing, for example, mine is at 5 frames per second. So to have 3 seconds, I would need to have 5 frames times 3, 15 frames. So you're probably not going to have enough frames. It's an easy fix. You just go ahead and duplicate all the different layers you have, and then you just kind of reorder them so that the animation goes through essentially the same loop, but twice. And then once you have that, it's really easy to do the export. Just go in the wrench icon menu here at the top, selecting the share option. And then in the bottom section, not in the share image, in the share layer, I know it sounds weird, you're going to select animated MP4. Making sure that the frame per second is the same as what you had set in your settings, otherwise you might not have the right length. You're going to select export here at the top. And once it's exported, you'll be able to select save video, and that's going to save the video in your camera roll. And from there, it's just like any other video you have on your iPad, so you can just post it and do whatever else you want to do with it. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn how to create more simple animations like this one in Procreate, I highly recommend you check out this playlist because I have a bunch more videos for you. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. Then click on the link right here and I'll meet you there.